Welcome to the Quotive Corner. Today's quote is one of those lines that looks simple on the surface, but quietly dismantles a misconception that most people carry around without realizing it. It's about humility, a word that gets misused almost as often as it gets invoked. True humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. That's from Rick Warren, pastor, theologian, and author of The Purpose-Driven Life, one of the best-selling nonfiction books in history with over 50 million copies sold. Warren has spent decades writing and speaking about purpose, character, and the inner life, and this line appears in that book as one of its more quietly powerful observations. A quick attribution note worth being upfront about. This quote circulates widely under C.S. Lewis's name, and Lewis did write beautifully about humility and mere Christianity, but the line itself is Warren's, not Lewis's. So, two halves, one important distinction. True humility is not thinking less of yourself. This is where Warren is doing something genuinely useful, correcting a popular misreading of what humility actually means. Most people, when they hear the word humility, instinctively reach for something like smallness, self-effacement, the deliberate suppression of your own worth, talent, or standing. The humble person, in the popular imagination, is the one who waves off compliments, downplays their achievements, and generally positions themselves below others as a kind of moral posture. Warren is saying that's not humility. That's a performance of it, and in some cases it's actually a form of insecurity wearing humility's clothing. The person who constantly diminishes themselves is still, in a very real sense, preoccupied with themselves. The internal monologue is still running. The self-assessment is still active. The focus is still inward, just pointed in a negative direction rather than a positive one. Real humility, in Warren's framing, doesn't require you to think poorly of yourself. It doesn't ask you to pretend your abilities are lesser than they are, or to manufacture false modesty as a social signal. You can know your strengths clearly and honestly, can even take genuine satisfaction in them, without that knowledge inflating into arrogance. The two things are separable. Accurate self-assessment is not the same as pride. C.S. Lewis himself made a similar observation in Mere Christianity, which is likely how the confusion between the two writers began. Lewis wrote that a truly humble person wouldn't be what most people call humble at all. They wouldn't be constantly telling you they were nobody. They'd seem like a cheerful, interested person who was genuinely curious about you. And then Lewis added the key line. The humble person will not be thinking about humility. They will not be thinking about themselves at all. Which is precisely where Warren picks up. It is thinking of yourself less. Not thinking less of yourself. Thinking of yourself less often, less frequently, with less of your total available attention. That's the shift, not the content of the self-assessment, but the direction of focus entirely. True humility isn't a revised opinion of yourself. It's a reorientation of where your attention goes. And when you frame it that way, the connection to selflessness becomes immediate and clear. The person who is genuinely thinking of themselves less is, by definition, thinking of others more. Their mental and emotional bandwidth, which in most people is heavily occupied by self-monitoring, self-protecting, self-promoting, and self-worrying, becomes available for something else, for the person in front of them, for the situation at hand, for the work that needs doing rather than for how the work reflects on them. We've talked before about what Freud noticed in a letter to his fiancée. That boldness arrives when you're sure of being loved, when the internal security is solid enough that you stop spending energy managing it. There's a parallel here. The person who has developed genuine humility, who has stopped being preoccupied with their own standing, has freed up a remarkable amount of cognitive and emotional energy. Not because they have diminished themselves, but because they have stopped needing constant maintenance of their self-image. The bandwidth that was tied up in self-concern becomes available for genuine engagement with the world. In a prior episode, we noted that Coach John Wooden gave us the distinction between character and reputation. That character is what you actually are, while reputation is what others think you are. Humility, in Warren's framing, is one of the clearest markers of genuine character precisely because it doesn't perform for an audience. The humble person isn't managing how their humility looks. They're just not thinking about themselves very much. And that quality, that outward orientation, tends to show up in how they treat people, how they lead, how they listen, and how they respond when things don't go their way. Major Dick Winters is also worth thinking about here. His men trusted him completely, not because he projected confidence or managed his image carefully, but because his attention was consistently on them and on the mission rather than on himself. That outward focus is what made his leadership feel different. He wasn't thinking about how he appeared as a leader. He was thinking about his people. The humility was structural, not performed. Now, the honest counterpoint. Thinking of yourself less is not the same as thinking of yourself never. There are situations that genuinely require self-advocacy, negotiating your worth, setting boundaries, protecting your interests in contexts where no one else will do it for you. The person who has so thoroughly redirected their attention outward that they can't show up for themselves when it matters has overcorrected. Selflessness, taken to an extreme, becomes self-erasure, which serves nobody well and often produces quiet resentment rather than genuine generosity. Warren's formulation is about orientation, not elimination. Think of yourself less. Instead of not at all, redirect the default. Loosen the grip of self-preoccupation without abandoning the healthy self-awareness that allows you to function and contribute effectively. And perhaps the most practical way to think about this in everyday life is simply as a question worth asking in any given moment. Where is my attention actually pointed right now? Am I in this conversation, or am I thinking about how I'm coming across in it? Am I engaged with this person's situation, or am I waiting for my turn to speak? Am I doing this work because it matters, or because of what it will reflect about me? Those are small questions, but the habit of asking them over time is what Warren is pointing toward. Not a dramatic transformation of character in a single moment, but the slow reorientation of attention that, accumulated across thousands of ordinary interactions, produces something genuinely different, something that looks, from the outside, a lot like wisdom, and from the inside, like freedom. Thanks for spending a few minutes here at the Quotive Corner. If this one made you notice where your attention has been today, and whether it could use a gentle redirect, that's the whole point. And with that, remember that wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. Don't forget to look out for the next episode.